Hey folks, let's take a walk down character creation for HSD2. The HSD2 rulebook separates character creation into two stages. The first is called character generation, and is essentially a step-by-step guide through the lore and history of your different character options. This is a large section and proceeds in a particular order to allow you to write your choices down in a logical fashion, beginning with the vector family you choose, refining it into a species, adding a morphism, picking a background, deciding on which corpse you learned under, etc. However, this section has no rules in it. It's all just story and background about the setting and what your choices mean from a roleplay standpoint. The section after this is called crunch time, and that's where you take all the choices you made before and actually assign values to them that use the game's system. There's no story in this section, it's essentially a series of steps to translate your choices into numbers. There are some great advantages to this layout, the largest being that once you've read the lore once and familiarized yourself with what a vector is, or what the Tark morphism looks like, or the history of cogs, you really don't need to reread that every time you make a new character. You can just say, I want to play a cog this time, and hop directly into the crunch time chapter where the system figures for the cogs are all written out without being cluttered with additional description. On the flip side, if you want to just read the story and don't want to be interrupted by numbers, you can do that too. In practice and testing, we found that while separating lore descriptors from the crunch makes your very first character a little more time-consuming than it would be otherwise, it makes every character for the game thereafter much faster and simpler to build, because you're not having to fish through half a chapter description to find the numbers you need. In-game reference becomes easier too, for the same reason. In addition, this also allows you the opportunity to build a character completely devoid of metadata if you want to. As long as you don't go hopping forward to the crunch time section, you can follow the character creation steps to generate a character just based on description rather than on what numeric advantages or disadvantages it might bring you. Then, when you get to crunch time, you just translate those choices over. Crunch time is where the system kicks in and it proceeds in the following order, which is still subject to change. It begins with the progression sheet, which is a primary growth system for the game and also how you determine many of your starting scores. The system's simple. Buy options on the grid from left to right by spending experience points. You start the game with 210 XP, and you can spend them in any amount in any order you want, provided you proceed from left to right. This gets you most of the primary drivers for your character, like stat scores, proficiency points, focus points, techniques, etc. Basically, this is the step where you build your base. There are several examples in this section of quick and balanced spending orders for new characters that will get you through this section in a matter of minutes. While I do recommend approaching the starting characters from a balanced spending point, I don't want to force players to do so you have a lot of freedom here at the beginning. Once you've built your character, the experience gain is only about 15 points per section, so buying new options is very quick and simple. You're basically just looking at whatever option it is you want next. With your main starting numbers selected, the next step is to modify them based on the things you chose during character generation. Your family will grant you an ability, a boon, which is a skill you're particularly good at, and two faults, which are skills you're particularly less good at. You have several choices as to which ones you apply them to. Species in HSD2 is largely a cosmetic thing. In HSD1, I had species as choices that had perks attached, but those have been rolled into family now. This is basically because in almost every single HSD1 group I spoke to, at least one or more players were using generic name-your-own-species options, and many were homebrewing new ones anyway, so I kind of figured we were better off leaving that aspect to the players. With your family and species selected, you're off to morphism. Morphisms provide you a movement score, a base mass, which is used to figure out things like how tough you are and how hard to hit you are, and a shape, which shows how many hexes you take up on the map and in what configuration. They also include another fault, some neat abilities, and some drawbacks. Every character morphism from HSD1 and Core Extended are reflected in some way in HSD2, but not all of them are actually in the morphism section. This is because the way the new system is laid out allowed me to separate the morphisms that were more dramatic to body shape, like lever stance and microism, from the morphisms that were more cosmetic, like bioluminescence and atypical patterning. Those were moved to a later section called Personal Quirks, which has the advantage of making them easier to combine on the same character. You can now make a Hemi-Horse Tar if you want to. It'll work fine. The next step is filling out a few soft scores gained from the numbers the morphisms gave you. That is the harder to hit versus harder to hurt thing I mentioned earlier. Mass is a primary driver for this exchange, and armor affects it as well. Finding your score is easy enough. Just look at your mass and check the corresponding evade and endure scores. This is also where you get your wound count from, which determines how much damage you can take before you fall unconscious. You picked a background option for your character earlier in character generation. The next page explains the mechanical benefits, including neat passive abilities that will unlock as your character grows. It's right before the last page, where you gain boons for whatever corpse you decided taught you as you grew up. These boons can offset faults you gained from earlier steps to make your character more reliable, or can be in different spots to make you very good at some things and perhaps not the best first choice to try others. The character is essentially built now. All that's remaining is a little personal customization. You're given 3 customization points that you can do to tweak things like a character's mass, some of their scores, their speed, etc., just to make them more unique from one to the next. You're also allotted 2 personal quirks, which allow you to get a wealth of neat abilities to show certain social aspects you're good at, appearance factors you may have, and things like that. You even start the game with a reclamation surgery to further diversify the character. Wrap it up by buying equipment, and you're all done. This character generation system is pretty set at this point in testing and has been used successfully many times by many groups, but there are a few elements of it that might shift position before it gets into backers' hands. The main piece in question right now is the location of the progression sheet step. Currently, the progression sheet is located before the modifier is gained through character generation because it is the largest determining factor for your scores. It provides the majority of them, while the other steps just tend to tweak it by 1 or 2. However, I have had a few groups say they'd prefer it further toward the end of the character progression so they can see how their family morphism choices affected them first. Both options will be explored before publication to see which one feels the most intuitive.